To keep seeing more stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you like this video, share your feedback in the comments section. The broken pyromancy. The fluorescent lights flickered in the cramped office of Hayes Auto Repair, casting shadows across the stack of medical bills that seemed to grow taller every week. Sienna Hayes sat at the battered metal desk, her calloused hands trembling slightly as she calculated the numbers for the third time, hoping somehow the math would change. It never did. The treatment Rosalie needed cost more than Sienna could earn in 6 months, even if every customer paid on time, which they never did. Outside the office window, the garage floor stretched before her like a monument to broken dreams. 2 cars waited for repairs their owners could not afford to collect. The hydraulic lift groaned with age every time she used it. The walls, once painted a hopeful blue, had faded to the color of old bruises. This place was all she had left of Thomas, her husband, who had built this business with his own hands before a scaffolding collapse took him away 2 years ago. Some days, Sienna felt like she was holding together broken pieces of a life that wanted to fall apart. The sound of labored breathing came from the small room behind the office. Rosalie was resting after school, her thin frame curled on the worn sofa Sienna kept there so her daughter would never be alone. At 13, Rosalie should have been running with friends, laughing without pain, living without the shadow of her condition following every step. Instead, her spine curved progressively worse each month, the degenerative condition stealing her childhood one vertebra at a time. The doctors said surgery might help, might stop the progression, might give her a chance at a normal life. They also said it would cost $140,000, a sum that might as well have been $1 million. Sienna pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting the exhaustion that lived in her bones. She had worked 18-hour days for months, taking every job no matter how small, but the medical bills climbed faster than her income. The insurance Thomas had maintained lapsed 6 months after his death when she could not afford the premiums. Now she stood alone against an impossible mountain, armed with nothing but a wrench and a stubborn refusal to give up on her daughter. The sharp knock on the garage bay door made Sienna jump. She glanced at the clock. It was past 7 in the evening, well beyond normal business hours. Through the grimy window, she saw 3 black sedans parked in formation outside her shop, their engines running, their presence radiating menace. Detroit had taught Sienna to recognize danger, and every instinct screamed at her to lock the doors and call the police. But she also recognized desperation, and desperate people sometimes brought desperate money. She walked to the door and pulled it open halfway. 2 men stood in the fading daylight, both wearing expensive suits that looked absurdly out of place in this neighborhood. The taller one had cold eyes and a scar running down his neck that disappeared beneath his collar. The shorter one carried himself with military precision, his hand resting near his jacket in a way that suggested a weapon lived there. "You fix wheelchairs?" the taller man asked, his accent thick with Eastern European roots. "I fix mechanical things," Sienna replied carefully. "What exactly needs fixing?" The men stepped aside, and a third figure emerged from the middle sedan. He was younger, perhaps 16, sitting in a wheelchair that looked like it cost more than Sienna's entire garage. The chair was a masterpiece of engineering, all sleek lines and carbon fiber, with a digital control panel that glowed softly in the dusk. The boy had dark hair and darker eyes, his face pale and drawn with an expression Sienna recognized immediately. It was the look of someone who had grown accustomed to pain. "The control system fails," the tall man said. "It must be fixed tonight. You will not ask questions. You will tell no one we were here. You will be paid well." Sienna studied the wheelchair, then looked at the boy. Something about how he sat bothered her, the way his left shoulder dipped lower than his right, how his fingers gripped the armrest with white knuckles, how his jaw clenched with each breath. She had seen that posture before, in the mirror, in Rosalie, in people who hurt so badly they forgot what it felt like not to hurt.
"Bring him inside," Sienna said, stepping back to allow them entry. They wheeled the boy into the garage, and Sienna closed the door behind them. The tall man positioned himself near the exit, while the military-looking one stood close to the boy, protective and threatening at once. Sienna knelt beside the wheelchair, bringing herself to the boy's eye level instead of looming over him as the men did. "I am Sienna," she said gently. "What is your name?" The boy looked surprised, as if no one had asked him something so simple in a long time. He glanced at the tall man, who nodded once, permission granted. "Nikolai," he said quietly. "Hello, Nikolai. Can you tell me what happens when the chair malfunctions?" "Sometimes it does not respond to the controls," Nikolai said. "It goes the wrong direction or stops completely." Sienna nodded, but her eyes were not on the chair. They were on how Nikolai sat, on the tension in his shoulders, on the way he breathed shallowly as if deeper breaths brought pain. She had learned to read bodies during 2 years of caring for Rosalie, learning to see what doctors missed, understanding that machines could be perfect while the person using them suffered. "May I examine the chair?" Sienna asked. "I need to move it and test the controls. It might be uncomfortable." "Do what you must," the tall man said impatiently. But quickly. Sienna spent 20 minutes testing every function of the wheelchair. The motors worked perfectly. The control system responded precisely. The battery showed full charge. The suspension was calibrated to factory specifications. There was nothing wrong with the chair itself. It was a machine operating exactly as designed, which meant the problem was somewhere else entirely. She sat back on her heels and looked at Nikolai again, really looked at him. Then she made a decision that would change everything. "The chair is not broken," Sienna said. The tall man stepped forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. "You are wrong. The chair fails. Fix it." "I did not say it works properly," Sienna replied, standing to face him without fear. "I said it is not broken. The machine functions perfectly. The problem is that the machine is hurting him." Silence fell across the garage. The military man moved his hand closer to his weapon. The tall man's eyes narrowed with threat. But Nikolai looked at Sienna with something that might have been hope. "Explain," the tall man commanded. Sienna turned to Nikolai, speaking directly to him instead of to the intimidating men who surrounded him. "How long have you been in pain?" "Real pain, not just discomfort, but the kind that makes you want to scream except you have learned not to because no one listens anyway." Nikolai's facade cracked. His eyes filled with tears he had been holding back for what looked like months. "Since the accident. Since the day I woke up and could not move my legs. But the doctors said the pain would fade, that I needed to adjust, that the chair was the best money could buy." "The chair is excellent," Sienna agreed. "But it was fitted for who you were 3 months ago, not who you are today. Your body has changed, your posture has shifted to compensate for pain, and now the chair is forcing you into positions that make everything worse. Every time you sit in it, you hurt more and your body tries to move away from the pain, which makes the chair seem like it is malfunctioning when really you are just trying to escape the agony." The tall man stared at her. "You can see this? The specialists, the doctors with their degrees and their expensive tests, they found nothing. But you, a mechanic in a garage, you can see what they missed." "I can see it because I live it," Sienna said. "My daughter has a spinal condition. I watch her fight pain every single day. I have learned that machines do not lie, but they also do not feel. The chair works perfectly for what it was designed to do, but nobody asked Nikolai where it hurts because nobody thought to listen." She walked to her tool bench and returned with a measuring tape and a notebook. "The chair needs to be adjusted, not fixed. The seat back needs to be repositioned, the armrests lowered, the footrests angled differently. It will take me 3 hours to do it properly, maybe 4, because I need to work slowly and keep asking Nikolai how it feels. I cannot just guess. I need him to tell me when the pain lessens."
The tall man pulled out a phone and stepped away, speaking in rapid Russian. Sienna heard the word "otets," which she knew meant father. Whoever these people were, they were about to call someone important, someone who made decisions, someone who would determine whether Sienna lived or died for speaking truth to power. While they waited, Sienna turned back to Nikolai. "I need to know something, and I need you to be honest with me. Is there anyone in your life who asks you how you feel? Not how the chair works, not whether you can move it properly, but how you actually feel." Nikolai shook his head slowly. "They ask if I need anything. They ask if the pain medicine works. But no one asks how I feel. I think they are afraid of the answer. I am not afraid, Sienna said. And I am asking. How do you feel, Nikolai? The boy's composure shattered completely. Tears ran down his face as words poured out, words he had been holding back for months. I feel like I am trapped inside a body that betrayed me. I feel like everyone sees the chair instead of me. I feel like I am supposed to be grateful for this expensive equipment when all I want is for someone to understand that I hurt all the time, every moment, and I am so tired of pretending to be fine. Sienna reached out and gently placed her hand on his shoulder, the first kind touch he had received in longer than he could remember. You do not have to pretend with me. Pain is real, and it deserves to be acknowledged. I am going to help you, Nikolai. Not because someone is paying me, but because I understand what it means to hurt while everyone around you expects you to be strong. The garage door opened with a bang that echoed like a gunshot. The truth revealed. The man who entered Sienna's garage did not walk, he commanded space. Victor Constantine stood 6 feet tall with silver hair swept back from a face carved from granite and ambition. His charcoal suit probably cost more than Sienna earned in 3 months, and his eyes, the same dark intensity as Nikolai's, swept across the garage with the assessment of someone who owned everything he surveyed. Behind him, 4 more men filed in, transforming the small space into something that felt dangerously crowded. You are the mechanic who claims my son's chair is not broken, Victor said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You have precisely 60 seconds to convince me why I should not remove my son from this place and have you arrested for wasting my time. Sienna straightened her spine, refusing to be intimidated despite the hammering of her heart. I said the chair works perfectly. The problem is that it is configured wrong for Nikolai's current condition. If you take him away now, he will continue to suffer, and you will continue to blame machines instead of listening to what your son has been trying to tell you. Victor's jaw tightened, a flash of anger crossing his face. I have provided my son with the best medical care money can purchase. Specialists from 3 countries have examined him. The chair was custom built by the finest engineers in Switzerland. You dare suggest they are all wrong and you, working in this, he gestured dismissively at the garage, are right? I am not saying they are wrong, Sienna replied, her voice steady despite the danger radiating from this man. I am saying they answered the wrong question. They asked what machine would work best. Nobody asked what would make Nikolai hurt less. There is a difference. Father, Nikolai's voice cut through the tension, small but determined. Please listen to her. She is the first person who has asked me how I feel instead of telling me what I need. Victor turned to his son, and Sienna saw something crack in his expression. For just a moment, the powerful man disappeared and a father stood there, frightened and desperate beneath the armor of control. You are in pain, Victor said, and it was not a question. I have been in pain since the accident, Nikolai said, tears streaming again. Every day, every hour. I told the doctors, but they said it was normal, that I needed to adjust, that the chair was perfect. So I stopped saying anything because no one believed me. But she believed me, Father. She knew without me saying a word. Victor turned back to Sienna, his expression unreadable. How could you know what trained physicians missed? Because I live with it, Sienna said quietly. She walked to the office door and opened it, revealing Rosalie asleep on the sofa, her body curved in the defensive posture of someone who even in sleep tried to escape pain. My daughter has a degenerative spinal condition. For 2 years, I have watched her hurt while doctors told me to be patient, to trust the process, to believe that expensive treatments would fix everything. I learned to see past what people say and watch what their bodies are telling me. Bodies do not lie, Mr. Constantine. They cannot. Victor stared at Rosalie, something shifting in his expression. What is her prognosis? She needs surgery that I cannot afford, Sienna said, closing the door gently to let her daughter sleep. But we are not talking about my problems. We are talking about your son, who is sitting in a chair that was perfectly fitted 3 months ago but does not fit him anymore because his body changed and nobody noticed. "Show me," Victor commanded. Sienna knelt beside Nikolai again, explaining as she measured. When someone cannot use their legs, the whole body compensates. Muscles that never worked before suddenly carry weight they were not designed for. The spine shifts, the shoulders adjust, everything changes. The chair was fitted when Nikolai's body was in one position, but pain made him shift to protect himself, and now the chair fights against his natural compensation. Every time he sits in it, he is being forced back into a position that hurts, so his body rebels, and the chair seems to malfunction when really Nikolai is just trying to escape the agony. She pointed to how Nikolai's left shoulder dipped lower than his right. "See how he leans? That is not weakness or bad posture. That is his body finding the one position where the pain is bearable." But the chair was built to keep him symmetrical and straight, which sounds good in theory but in practice means constant suffering. Victor watched intently as Sienna demonstrated how the armrest forced Nikolai's shoulder up, how the seat back pushed against his spine in exactly the wrong place, how the headrest made him tilt his neck at an angle that sent pain shooting through his body. "The doctors never saw this," Victor said slowly. "They ran tests, they took measurements, they consulted with specialists around the world. They looked at the data, not at your son," Sienna said. "They measured him while he was lying down, relaxed, not accounting for how he actually sits, how he actually lives. They created a perfect chair for a perfect patient, but Nikolai is not a patient. He is a person, and people are messy and complicated and they hurt in ways machines cannot measure." Victor was silent for a long moment, his hand resting on Nikolai's shoulder with a tenderness that seemed out of place on such a hard man. When he spoke, his voice was different, quieter, almost vulnerable. "Can you fix this?" "I can adjust the chair," Sienna said. "It will take several hours because I need to make small changes and constantly check with Nikolai about what feels better. I cannot do it quickly. Rushing would risk making things worse." "Then do not rush," Victor said. "Take whatever time you need. I will wait." The tall man who had first brought Nikolai protested in Russian, but Victor silenced him with a single look. "I said I will wait, Dmitri. My son has been suffering for months while I threw money at the problem instead of listening. I will not make that mistake again." Sienna began working, making tiny adjustments to the chair's configuration while constantly asking Nikolai questions. "Does this feel better or worse? Can you tell me where the pressure is now? What happens when I angle this forward instead of back?" She worked with the patience of someone who understood that rushing to fix something often broke it worse, who knew that some problems could not be solved with force but only with attention and care. Victor watched from a corner of the garage, his expression growing more troubled with each adjustment that made his son sigh with relief. "I should have seen this," he said after an hour. "I should have known my own son was suffering." "You were trying to fix the problem," Sienna said without looking up from her work. "Sometimes we get so focused on finding solutions that we forget to ask if we are solving the right problem." "What is your daughter's name?" Victor asked suddenly. "Rosalie. And the surgery she needs?" "It would stabilize her spine, possibly stop the degeneration," Sienna said. "But it costs more than I will earn in the next 5 years." "How much?" Sienna hesitated, then named the figure. Victor pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking briefly in Russian. When he hung up, he looked at Sienna directly. "The money will be in your account tomorrow morning. Use it for your daughter." Sienna's hand stilled on the wrench she was holding. "I cannot accept that. It is too much. I do not even know you. You showed my son more compassion in 1 hour than a team of specialists showed him in 6 months, Victor said. You are risking your safety by standing up to my men and telling me uncomfortable truths. You are doing this not because I am paying you, but because you see a suffering child and you cannot help but try to ease that suffering. In my world, such people are rare. When I find them, I protect them. I do not want your money as payment, Sienna said firmly. If you want to help, then help because it is right, not because you owe me something. A ghost of a smile crossed Victor's hard face. You are either very brave or very foolish. Most people would take the money and ask no questions. I am neither brave nor foolish, Sienna replied. I am a mother who understands what it means to watch your child suffer and feel helpless to stop it. I would not wish that feeling on anyone, even someone who sent armed men to threaten me. I did not send them to threaten you, Victor corrected. I sent them because I did not trust anyone to touch my son. In my position, trust is a luxury I cannot afford. Then why trust me now? Victor looked at Nikolai, who for the first time in months sat without tension in his shoulders, without pain etched across his face. Because you gave me back something I thought I had lost. You gave me my son's trust. Nikolai stopped talking to me months ago, not with anger but with resignation, as if he had decided that I could not understand him. But tonight, he spoke. He told me the truth. That is worth more than any amount of money. Sienna finished the final adjustment and stepped back. Try it now, Nikolai. Move the chair around, feel how it sits. Nikolai operated the controls, and for the first time, the chair responded smoothly to his commands without him flinching in pain. He moved forward, backward, turned in circles, his face transforming with wonder and relief. It does not hurt, he said, his voice breaking with emotion. Father, it does not hurt anymore. Victor knelt beside his son's chair, gripping Nikolai's hand with both of his own. I am sorry, he said, and the powerful man's voice cracked. I am so sorry I did not listen, that I did not see. I thought providing the best equipment was enough. I was wrong. You were trying to help, Nikolai said. But Sienna did help. She listened when everyone else just talked. Victor stood and faced Sienna, his expression serious. The money for your daughter's surgery is not a debt. Consider it a gift from one parent to another. But I want to offer you something else as well. My son needs someone who understands his condition, who will listen instead of just prescribing solutions. I want to hire you as his personal medical equipment specialist. I am not qualified for that, Sienna protested. I am a mechanic, not a medical professional. You are exactly what my son needs, Victor insisted. Someone who sees him as a person first and a patient second. Name your price. Sienna shook her head. I cannot work for you. I have a business, and I have Rosalie to care for. But I will make you a different offer. Bring Nikolai here once a week. I will check his equipment, make adjustments, and most importantly, I will listen to him. In exchange, you help me keep this garage running so I can continue helping people who cannot afford expensive repairs. Victor studied her for a long moment, then extended his hand. You drive a hard bargain, Miss Hayes. We have an agreement. As they shook hands, Sienna realized she had just made a deal with a man whose reputation should have terrified her. But she also realized that beneath the power and the danger, Victor Constantine was simply a father who loved his son and had not known how to help him. In that, they were not so different after all. The second chance. The weeks that followed the night Nikolai Constantine first rolled into her garage transformed Sienna's life in ways she never imagined possible. True to his word, Victor transferred the money for Rosalie's surgery the very next morning. When Sienna's bank called to verify the deposit of $140,000, she sat in her office and cried for 20 minutes straight, releasing years of fear and desperation in great shuddering sobs that Rosalie heard from the other room. Mom? Rosalie had appeared in the doorway, her thin frame leaning against the wall for support. What is wrong? Nothing is wrong, sweetheart, Sienna had managed to say through her tears. Everything is finally right. The surgery was scheduled for 3 weeks later at the best spinal center in Michigan. The night before the procedure, Sienna lay awake beside Rosalie's hospital bed, holding her daughter's hand and whispering prayers to a God she was not sure listened anymore. But someone must have heard because the surgery was a complete success. The doctors stabilized Rosalie's spine, inserted the necessary supports, and gave the prognosis that with physical therapy, she would likely live without the constant pain that had defined her childhood. On the same day Rosalie entered surgery, across town, Nikolai began treatment at a specialized rehabilitation center. Victor had not just accepted Sienna's help for his son, he had investigated every recommendation she made, consulted with the physicians she suggested, and committed himself fully to understanding Nikolai's needs instead of just throwing money at them. The boy who had sat in silent suffering now participated actively in his own care, speaking up when something hurt, celebrating small victories, rediscovering hope one painful day at a time. Sienna kept her promise to see Nikolai weekly, and those sessions became something neither of them expected. They became the foundation of an unlikely friendship between two families from completely different worlds. Nikolai and Rosalie met during one of these visits, two teenagers who understood pain in ways their peers never could, and they connected instantly. They texted daily, shared their struggles and victories, and gave each other something precious, the knowledge that they were not alone. Victor visited the garage frequently, ostensibly to check on his son's equipment, but really, Sienna suspected, because he found peace in the simple space where people fixed broken things without judgment or pretense. He never spoke much about his business, but Sienna was not naive. She knew the kind of man Victor was, knew that his wealth came from ventures that existed in moral gray areas at best. She also knew that people were complicated, that a man could be dangerous in one context and gentle in another, that fathers who loved their sons could still make terrible choices in other parts of their lives. One evening, 2 months after their first meeting, Victor arrived at the garage alone. No guards, no Dmitri, just a man in an expensive suit looking tired and older than his years. "Nikolai is doing well," he said without preamble. "The doctors say his progress is remarkable." "He is doing well because he finally has people listening to him," Sienna replied, wiping grease from her hands. "How are you doing, Victor?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Why do you ask?" "Because you look like someone carrying a weight that gets heavier every day," Sienna said gently. "I recognize that look. I wore it for 2 years." Victor was silent for a moment, then spoke with unusual vulnerability. "There are people in my organization who view my attention to Nikolai as weakness. They see compassion as a liability in our business. They are pressuring me to delegate his care to others, to return my focus to more profitable concerns." "What do you want to do?" Sienna asked. "I want to be the father my son deserves," Victor said quietly. "But I am also responsible for an empire that employs hundreds of people, that supports families, that exists in a world where showing weakness invites destruction." "Those are not your only choices," Sienna said. "You do not have to abandon your responsibilities to be present for your son. But you might have to change how you fulfill those responsibilities." "You do not understand the world I operate in," Victor said with a bitter edge. "There is no room for change, no tolerance for weakness." "Then maybe you are in the wrong world," Sienna replied. "Or maybe it is time to build a different one." Before Victor could respond, the garage's bay door exploded inward with a crash that sent metal fragments flying across the floor. 3 men rushed in, and Sienna recognized the cold efficiency of violence about to happen. She moved instinctively toward the office where Rosalie was doing homework, but one of the men grabbed her arm and threw her against the wall hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. "This is what happens when you make the boss soft," one of them said to Victor in heavily accented English. "This is what happens when you forget who you are." Victor's transformation was instant and terrifying. The gentle father disappeared, replaced by the man who had built an empire through force and fear. "You dare enter here and threaten what is mine?" His voice was ice and fury. "You dare touch her?" "We dare because you have forgotten your purpose," the man replied. "You spend your time in this garage instead of managing your territories. You show weakness, and weakness invites challenges. We are here to remind you what strength looks like." What happened next occurred so quickly that Sienna barely processed it. Victor moved with brutal precision, disarming the nearest man and using the weapon against the second. The third tried to run but found Dmitri blocking the exit, because of course Dmitri had been there all along, watching from the shadows. Within 30 seconds, all three attackers were on the ground, bleeding but alive, while Victor stood over them breathing hard. "You came to my son's sanctuary," Victor said quietly. "You threatened the woman who saved him. There is no forgiveness for this." "Victor, stop," Sienna's voice cut through the rage. She stood despite the pain in her ribs, despite the fear hammering through her veins. "This is not who you want to be, not here, not in front of my daughter." Victor turned to her, and she saw the war happening behind his eyes, the collision of two identities fighting for dominance. "They attacked you. They would have hurt Rosalie. But they did not," Sienna said firmly. "And you can choose what happens next. You can be the man they expect, or you can be the man Nikolai needs. But you cannot be both forever. Eventually, you have to decide." The moment stretched taut as wire. Then Victor lowered the weapon and turned to Dmitri. "Take them to the warehouse. Hold them there until I decide what to do." After Dmitri removed the attackers, Victor slumped against the workbench, suddenly looking exhausted. "I have put you in danger. I should never have come here. You came here because this is the one place where you can be yourself instead of the role you play," Sienna said. "But those men were right about one thing. You cannot keep living in two different worlds. Eventually, they will collide, and people will get hurt." "What would you have me do?" Victor asked. "Walk away from everything I have built? My organization spans 3 countries. Thousands of people depend on the stability I provide." "I am not telling you to abandon your responsibilities," Sienna said. "I am telling you that there are different ways to lead, different kinds of strength. The man who knelt beside his son and apologized for not listening, that was strength. The man who kept his word to a stranger because it was the right thing to do, that was strength. You do not need to be ruthless to be respected. You just need to be honest." Victor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You do not understand my world." "You are right, I do not," Sienna agreed. "But I understand what it means to survive by doing things you are not proud of. I understand what it costs to keep going when every day feels like a battle. And I understand that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop fighting and start building something better." In the weeks that followed, Sienna watched Victor begin the slow, painful process of transformation. He started dismantling the criminal aspects of his organization, transitioning legitimate businesses to proper management, and cutting ties with the violent enforcers who saw compassion as weakness. It was dangerous work that earned him enemies, but it also earned him something he had not had in years, the ability to look his son in the eye without shame. The garage became a sanctuary for both families. Rosalie and Nikolai spent hours there, working on small projects with Sienna's tools, talking about their dreams for lives beyond pain. Victor invested in the business, not as a takeover but as a partnership, helping Sienna expand to serve more people who could not afford expensive repairs. The space transformed from a place of desperate survival into something that resembled hope. 6 months after that first night, Sienna stood in her garage watching Rosalie demonstrate her improved mobility to Nikolai, who cheered every small victory as if it were a miracle. Victor stood beside her, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked at peace. "I owe you more than money," Victor said quietly. "You gave me back my son, my integrity, my chance to be better." "You gave me the same thing," Sienna replied. "You gave me the resources to save my daughter. You gave me hope when I had forgotten what it felt like. We saved each other, Victor. That is what people do when they choose to see each other as human instead of obstacles or transactions." "The organization still has challenges," Victor admitted. "Leaving that world is not simple. But for the first time in decades, I am building something I am proud of instead of just protecting what I fear to lose." Sienna smiled, watching their children laugh together. That is what second chances look like. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Built on truth instead of fear, on compassion instead of force. As the sun set through the garage's high windows, casting long shadows across the floor where two broken wheelchairs had once brought together two desperate families, Sienna realized that the true miracle was not the healing of bodies but the transformation of hearts. She had learned that strength could wear many faces, that enemies could become allies, that sometimes the most powerful thing a person could do was simply listen when everyone else chose to ignore. And in a garage in Detroit, two children who had known only pain found friendship. Two parents who had faced impossible choices found redemption. And one woman who had almost given up on hope discovered that sometimes miracles happen not because of wealth or power, but because someone chose compassion when fear would have been easier. That was the real story, the one worth telling. Not about a mechanic and a mafia boss, but about human beings who found each other in darkness and chose to build toward light.